Hey everybody, welcome back to The Loop. All week this week, we've been talking about what it looks like to listen to God. Listening to God isn't always easy, especially if you're new to faith. And so when we're listening to God, the question is, how can we be confident that we're actually hearing from God? How do we know if it's God or if it's just my own desires? Thankfully, God speaks, and He is not the author of confusion. He speaks through His Word. He speaks through His Son. He speaks through His Spirit, but He also speaks through His people. And that's really what I want to talk about today. When God speaks through His people, it's both an incredible privilege, but it also presents an incredible challenge. It's a privilege to be used by God in another person's life. It's a privilege for God to speak through you to another person or vice versa. It's a privilege for God to speak through you to encourage people who are discouraged or to remind them of a truth when they're heading in the wrong direction. As a pastor, God speaks through me and through His Word so that people may benefit. But like I said earlier, it's not just a privilege, it also presents a challenge. The challenge stems from the fact that I'm not perfect and I'm not God. And here's the deal, you're not either. We are all fallible people who make mistakes all the time. We may have the best of intentions, but we can still misguide people by misrepresenting what God has said. Now, that doesn't mean that we refuse to let God speak through His people. It just means that we have to have some safeguards in place. Safeguards like 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 37 and 38. There, Paul wrote this. He said, if anyone thinks they are a prophet or otherwise gifted by the Spirit, let them acknowledge that what I'm writing to you in the Scriptures is the Lord's command. But if anyone ignores this, they themselves will be ignored. He's saying that when God speaks through His people, it will always be consistent with what God has said in His Word, through His Son, or through His Spirit, because they're all on the same team. If it's not consistent with what God has already said, we can hear, but we should probably ignore. Paul said something very similar in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 20 through 22. He said, do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test them all, hold on to what is good, and reject every kind of evil. Some of what people say to you, you need to reject because it's not from God. But some of what people say to you, it is good and it is from God. Why? Because God speaks through His people. When that's the case, hold on to what is good and listen carefully to what they say.